Oh, how I love to DIY me some tags. And this little joint, when I seen it at Dollar Tree, reminded me of a palette, but it's a fence. But I love palettes, so I picked that up and I'm like, let's make us a nice little wall planter with a stencil, okay? We got to remove the home sign because it's in our way. Believe it or not, this came off really easy, and then I really thought it was funny because underneath the laser pop-out pieces they put on here, there's actually the word on here in silver. I see you, Dollar Tree. I see you. Now we're going to just remove our little, the twine that is on the back of here. And at this point, I've had enough staples, so I'm just skipping all of that and just being lazy, cutting all of the ends and leaving that little tiny bit stuck in there with the twine. Like, just muck it. We're moving on. Here's the beautiful stencil we're going to be using today. It's an owl. I picked this up off Amazon. I'm not sure if it's down in my link or not for my affiliate store. And obviously, put your stencil wherever you want. I'm going to catty corner mine. I guess that's how you would describe it, because we're going to put planter piece down in the opposite section. I didn't want whatever flower or greenery I put in here to cover up the stencil. So pretty. We need to give this a nice base, so I'm just using some white chalk paint here, and I did 3 layers. It took 3 to get some nice coverage. You can obviously use the back. I know a lot of people do that. I've done that before just to save me this step, but I felt like I wanted to keep the back, and we're just going to paint the front. I'm going to use a paint stick to create that pocket look in our little planter piece here. We got to be able to have some room to shove some stuff down in there. So I'm just measuring this to size, and then we're going to need to bring in our miter shears. People, I do want to emphasize this is not the easiest way to cut a paint stick. If you have hand grip strength issues, I recommend using a miter box with the saw, okay? I was being super lazy and decided to just gently press down on the sections, and then I flipped the paint stick back and forth, pressing down in the same section, so I was able to easily break it. And I wanted to keep the piece neutral. I almost didn't paint these at all, but decided against that and took a little bit of Waverly's Antique Wax and went over all the little pieces. For the stencil part, I wanted to keep it really colorful, so I grabbed a bunch of different colors along with some brown and some black, because I want the little piece that we just stained to blend into the stencil. I highly recommend, whenever you're going to do a large piece like this, especially if you're going to be working on top of the stencil for any length of time, tape that sucker down. Grab you some painter's tape and put a couple pieces on there just to hold your stencil in place. I'm going to be using a round brush mostly, but I will be alternating with a stippling brush for different effects. A soft round brush is going to give you a very faded light appearance with your paints, and a stippling brush will help give you heavier highlights. And it is important that whenever you're stenciling to remember the main trick to getting a good stencil without having a lot of bleed through is really your onloading and offloading of the brush. You want to make sure that it is almost a dry brush and it doesn't have a lot of paint on it. This is also going to help for the transition from color to color if you're using different colors. If you're just using one color, I wouldn't stress it too much. And in case anyone is interested, it took me about an hour to paint this entire stencil. I let that dry and then took a dotting tool and used a couple different colors to go around where I painted in areas and add some highlights, and then put a couple little dots going down in different sizes. I added a little bit of depth to the nose. And obviously, people, if you don't want to add any of this, don't. If you want to just paint your stencil all one color, just paint it all one color. This is just something I really like to do with stenciling, because you can take something, if you have a hard time drawing, and create an entire piece gently going over the stencil with light paint colors, and it looks like you hand drew it or you hand colored it, depending on the care and time that you take applying all of your colors, along with any additional little enhancements with a dotting tool. This turned out super pretty. I do wish I put a couple more highlights in certain areas, but for the most part, I love this. I let the stencil dry, and then I put our pieces on where I wanted them to go and just kind of mark the spaces. So this way I could come back in with the hot glue and then easily just kind of trace over the sections with the hot glue that I put our little marks, and then attach our pieces. And people, I do want to stress, okay, this is hot glue. This is not E6000 and Gorilla Glue gel. If you want this to last for a good long time, make sure you're incorporating some of that, or even some wood glue, so that way if you want to hang this on the door and the sun hits it, that hot glue is not going to just melt off and your DIY piece isn't going to just fall apart. I felt like the section we were going to put a hanger needed a little something, so I picked up some rings from Dollar Tree, little wooden rings, I guess that's what you want to call them. I decided to kind of stain one up with some antique Waverly wax and attach that right over the hole before I placed our hanger on. It's not every day you run into a piece like this, and when you do, and you love farmhouse like I do, you pick it up because you need to do something to it. Now, there was a little bit of staining on it. I was worried I was going to have to put a primer, but once I cleaned the piece off, these wiped right off, so no primer was necessary. Now, I did sand and prep the piece off camera. You're welcome. No thanks necessary. I know. We're going to take the Waverly White chalk paint and we're going to paint over this piece that someone painted on here. I know, a moment of silence. Okay, now we're going to take this black Craftsmart premium chalky acrylic paint and do the roof. I usually never do traditional farmhouse, and I just had to with this piece. Before we put the stencil on here, I'm taking an 800 grit piece of sandpaper just to get any extra lumpy bumpies off so it's nice and smooth. Also, this is going to give our final product a nice buttery looking finish when we put our sealer on top of everything. I'm taking a microfiber cloth to go over just to make sure I get any crusty bits off of our project. And then we're gonna bring in the sponge. Now I'm gonna clip the top of this because I want it kind of flat. I didn't have any circle ones around. We're being cheap, so we're improvising. I'm using this beautiful stencil I picked up at Ross for like $3.99. Are you sleeping on Ross craft section? I think I plugged my brows with Brandy's already, but crafting section at Ross is banging for little deals like this. And I could not wait to use the stencil. The second I seen this piece, I was like, I already know what I'm doing with it. I'm lightly stippling this on here, stippling. I say that wrong all the time. You do you if you want to do it heavy. I like this really worn look, and this is exactly how I wanted this to turn out. It's absolutely stunning. And on the top, I added a little bit of florals, and that's it for this one. using Dixie Belle's White Lightning Cleaner, and I do put mine in a spray bottle. They do not recommend that, but it works out just fine for me. I saved you the cleaning, you're welcome. And I think this piece is going to bleed, so I did also put a layer of Dixie Belle Balsam on here, and I'm using Waverly's Lavender. That's it, just Waverly's Lavender. And I'm going to coat the whole thing. This did take 2 coats, not too bad, you know what I mean, not too bad. Didn't take long to dry because I used my little heat gun. And then we're going to need to grab us some joint compound, a stencil, and whatever color paint you want to do, because we're going to create a raised stencil. Who's shocked? This is like my signature thing. Are you shocked? If you're new, don't be shocked. Get used to it. This is what I do. Okay, so joint compound, I'm using Waverly's White, and we're just mixing it together till it's all creamy. A little bit of ASMR right there for you. Now, you can do this however you want. I have wrung this many times and used a plastic spoon. Just make sure your stencil is pressed down in the exact spot you are spreading out your mixture. This is not a tedious and time-consuming project. It takes just a couple minutes. Just be mindful and move your hand as you go for a larger piece. If it's a small piece, just make sure you're pressing properly. This is also in real time. I did not speed any of this up, so this way you could see, well, I mean, I did fade as I move forward, but as you're seeing it, that's actually how I'm doing it. It's not sped up the process. Are you guys picking up what I'm putting down? Anyhow, let's move on. So when you get to the point where you're completely done, you're welcome to go back over and check, make sure you didn't miss anything. And if you have some smooshes and you want to fix them, use your finger, or you could use a dotting pen, a toothpick, and go back and make some adjustments. It was not necessary for this. And yes, you can use your heat gun to dry this up quicker. I like to do that. And I'm going to take some Rust-Oleum metallic accents. I recently had a subscriber, Miss Jax, talk about mixing some, shinies and metallics and stuff like that. I'm like, I got this stuff. So let's use this on a project. So I took this and rubbed it all around the edges and then came back in over the top of the project. This stuff dries super quick, so make sure you're working quickly. It also, the more you use, the heavier of a metallic it is. I was trying to leave some gaps and keep it fairly thin. Now, I like to use kind of when I'm putting florals on something, a base. So I was trying to use this tumbling block, and then I'm dropping the tumbling block everywhere. And I'm like, I'm gonna get crusty bit fingers again, because this Gorilla Glue gel means serious business. So I'm like, oh, let's hurry up and just get this glued on here before I mess my whole hand up. If this happens to you, quickly take a paper towel or something and make sure that you get up the spots where it was touching, because you don't want to go back, and which I've done before, and put my hand in it, and then I had like my table sticking to me. It was a mess. Anyhow, let's move on with the project. I want my center flower to stick up a little bit, so I'm putting this base, you could use popsicle stick as a base too. I just like doing this because I feel like it gives more of a sturdier attachment when I'm doing florals, and it also allows me to kind of, tier them a little bit. I'm taking some solo wood flowers, and I'm using the hot glue and the Gorilla Glue. This way I know them suckers are not going anywhere. Plus, I always think they have a very high-end look to them. For this next one, we're going to need a 1x1 and cut it to 12 inches. We're going to create a little coffee cup holder with just using a stick. And for our base, we're going to need this 1x4. I mean, are they ever really what they say they are? I don't think so. But I'm cutting it to about 5 to 6 inches. Really, this is kind of your preference with the size of your base. I knew, this is for my mama, I knew she was using big coffee cups for this. So I scaled up. And then I'm taking this 1x3 and cutting it to a square. So it's like our little base that's going to go in the center of this. So first we're going to take the two larger pieces, put them together, and then we're going to just hit them up with some wood glue, smoosh it all down in there, rub it really well, and you're going to want to clamp this together or set them, you know, on something with something very heavy to hold them together. Here's a clamp. Look at me helping y'all out. Look at this clamp. So once that dries, you're then going to want to measure your square so we can get it as centered as possible, and then glue this down so that way we can clamp this on top of the other piece. Yeah, there was a lot of drying going on around here, people, okay? A lot of patience, a lot of drying whenever we're using wood glue and clamps. There's a lot of it. At the bare minimum, I try to let it dry at least 4 to 6 hours before I attempt anything like this, but this was a next day event. Again, I'm using a dowel and a drill bit, and we're putting a hole in the bottom that's going to attach to our base. If you wanted to use a drill bit and go up through the bottom with the screw, you're completely welcome to do that. I didn't have a screw long enough. To find the center, we're going to just make a cross X pattern to find the center and drill straight down. And then we're going to cut our dowel to size so it fits in our holes and wood glue it on up and then let this dry. Now, if your dowel is a little loose, feel free to put some little shavings in there. You're not hurting nothing. All it's going to do is just add to that stickiness. And as you can see here, I was not afraid to just lather it all over. It's like an abundant amount. And more drying, of course. 90% of the hardware in my mom's house is silver, and I didn't have any silver hooks, so I'm just going to take Dixie Belle's gilding wax and go over all of these. And I even do that with the screws once I screw these in. See how it just turns them silver? I think there's also something called Buff and Rub that does a very similar thing, but I use Dixie Belle, and this is amazing, so it's what I use. Here's our little knob that I got from Hobby Lobby on clearance for 99 cents. The little leaf part is a dark blue. You cannot tell it by looking at it, but it is a dark blue. So we're going to take some stencils that I had on hand, mix up some black and some mountain blue paint to give a dark blue, and then we're going to just add our stencils on here. And I'm going to stipple it on here light and dark in different areas to give it a very French country type of look. And I'm not going to bore you with a ton of stenciling, but I did want to show you that you can take, because one of the things that I did do with these stencils, because they are very like stiff plastic type material, is I did use them to wrap our little pole that we have going on here. So once I get to this part, and look how pretty it is, I first mark where I am going to put our little cup holders, and then I take the plastic stencil and I start to press against the pole in a very, I don't use no painter's tape, anything, because I want this to be able to move. See how I'm pressing it now to the other side? You can literally move and turn this as you go. And if you do not, this is a great little technique. If you do not have vinyl where you can absolutely lay it on there and you're doing something that has actual corners and curves, you can slowly move the plastic stencil to work for you. When I was all done with that, I then drilled a hole in the top and screwed our little knob piece in. Once the paint dried, I came back in with a Sharpie oil marker and added some of those black highlights just to give the stencil a little bit more of a pop. And that is it for this. For this simple DIY, we're going to use these two pretty colors, Moss and Tea Rose, Vintage Tea Rose. And you're just going to cut 2 pieces of 4x4, and these are roughly 1.5 inches thick. Not exact, but you know, I sanded the sides down. Figured you've seen enough of me cutting in the video, so I saved you this part. You're welcome. Okay, get a 4x4 from Home Depot or Lowe's and, you know, cut it down to size. Then paint each one a color, you know, let them dry, and then I did sand these down to give them a little bit of a rustic look, and I used a 220 grit sandpaper for this. The reason I didn't go lower is because I didn't want it to create like gouges and scrape marks in my wood pieces, and the lower you go, the rougher the sandpaper, so I feel like 220 is a safe bet. I am mixing we are out of white acrylic paint. I'm mixing white acrylic paint with some spackling. We're going to create a raised stencil on these 2 little blocks, and that's all we're doing for this. I really feel like little block decor is a big thing, and if you know me, I loved raised stencils, so I thought let's do different colors and keep the same stencil. You could do the same colors and different stencils. That would be a nice idea too, but I felt using different colors with the same stencil would tie them in together, and really loved how these turned out at the end of the day. You're welcome to use a vinyl for this as well. I like using these plastic reusable stencils. They're easy to just wipe off with the spackling. Just be mindful of how fast you're going when you're applying your spackling and how much you're pressing, because if you're not pressing your hand, see how my hand is over it, if you're not pressing your hand in certain spots as you're applying it, it will smush underneath of your stencil, creating a lot of bleed, but I think I'll do okay. What do you? This little tag is one of my favorite new finds at Dollar Tree, and I love this Tim Holtz paste, so we're going to create a little raised design on here. And people, in the event you feel like you need fancy tools for stuff like this, you don't. Check this out. I'm just using a little plastic spoon. Now I'm going to change the color here, so we're going to take some black acrylic paint, give it a little squirt, and then smoosh it around until our paste is the color of the paint. And then grab you a stencil, people. Well, I grabbed 2. I grabbed some bees and some flowers. They're kind of in this season. Well, they were written last year too, but I thought this stencil was cute, and we're just gonna roll on with it. If you're not a bee fan, grab whatever you want, okay? Don't let me, you know, stunt your creativity. And yes, you see me trimming the stencil down. You don't have to do this. You can keep yours whole. I just trim mine down. I'll keep them in a little container, rinse them off whenever I need them. You know what I mean? You do you. But cutting them down lets me fit them on this little piece just perfectly, and then I just smooshed in the mixture around. I do recommend taping this down. Don't be a rebel like me and just hold it on there. Messes happen and mistakes are definitely made. I personally just wanted to try it out because this paste is fairly new to me and I love it. So, you know, I need to be able to give you guys my real opinion, and I can't do that if I don't try different things. So I'm taking 2 different colors, a little peach here and a yellow, and mixing them up to give us the color for our little flower. Even though I didn't put any yellow on our bee, I thought it would be nice to kind of have a little pop of yellow on here outside of the bee, giving a really nice contrast. And then I just took a little gem that was, you know, on one of my little sticker things from Dollar Tree, plopped it in the center here, and I did decide to put a little bit of highlights around the flower using a dotting tool. I just made little dots and made them smaller as we went along, and decided to add in one more little flower up in the corner. This turned out so flippin' cute. I have several DIY ideas for these, but the first one that came to mind was to make a giant rolling pin with some shelves. I got inspired to create this from a recent browsing trip to Burlington. I found these beautiful pieces and I was like, oh my gosh, I love these. I can't believe I didn't pick them up. But instead I was like, we're gonna create a large 3-foot wall hanging shelf rolling pin to put over my doorway into the kitchen. And y'all know my projects can't start without mishaps. Oh my god. Stop it. I was trying to get everything clamped down and put into place, and I didn't realize that the jigsaw was outweighing the station area that I had set up here, and it kept tipping backwards. Had to rub 2 brain cells together to figure that out. To recreate this piece, you'll need 2 main things: a jigsaw and a piece of underlayment from Home Depot, aside from your Dollar General $1 pieces. The rest is really up to you, depending upon how you want to create your shelf pieces. And of course, I'm going to share with you how I created mine. It did take me about 30 minutes of measuring, and I realized I was only going to be able to use 2 of the Dollar General pieces with the space that I had. Since I was putting this over a doorway, I only had so much room. I would have created this a little bit higher than I did, wider I guess you would have said, than the 6 inches that I did. And you'll see me here where I'm just kind of measuring from point to point to make sure that it's 6 inches on both sides, and then I'm drawing a line straight down. So as we're cutting with our jigsaw, we make sure we stay as straight as possible. This particular jigsaw shows on the sides what you should have it put at for what you're cutting. I'm going to keep mine on 2, and that looks like this. If you have never used a jigsaw before, it can be extremely intimidating, but I can guarantee you that if you just take your time and do it little by little, it is not as scary as you think it is. Just make sure that you have everything clamped down properly, or you're going to watch your board bounce, which you're going to get to experience with me in a minute here. I left that in for you to share. It took me about 10 minutes to actually cut the whole piece, and as I went, I just stopped and started as I went around the edges, making sure I had my curve properly, and then I adjusted the jigsaw. I stayed slightly outside of my traced edge because I knew it wasn't going to matter if it was like a centimeter or an inch off, and I'm going to come back in and do a light sanding over the whole piece anyway. This end piece right here hung off the surface I had it attached to, and it got a little scary. So yeah, people, it's important to make sure you got that sucker clamped down and nice and stable so it doesn't bounce like that on you. Once I had this finished, I'm just taking a 220 grit of sandpaper and I'm putting it around a sand sponge and giving this a nice little sanding to make sure everything is smooth. To create our shelf pieces, I'm going to cut this in half. It is a 1x3 and it is the size that I want it for the shelf. I did not have a piece available the size that I wanted. I didn't want anything too heavy. I could have did tumbling tower blocks, but I worry about them looking a little cheap from above when I'm looking up, if I can see glue or anything like that coming from them, or little gap pieces that we have from the tumbling tower blocks. You know, they're not all created equally. This was just the best method for me without having to spend more money on another piece of wood. For the sides of our little baskets we're creating, I'm using some painter sticks and I measured them to about 3 inches. I didn't want them to come all the way up the top because I wanted the greenery to pop out on the sides. I cut them down off camera, and then I took these little square pieces. I had this really small piece that was just kind of sitting off in the corner, and I cut it in half because I decided that I didn't want our piece flat up against the wall. I want it to kind of pop out. So I'm just using that as a brace. I'm using wood glue for that and some nails. And of course, there's always issues whenever I do stuff like this. And And if that wasn't bad enough, once I got it in the house, I realized that I needed to take one of these painter sticks and put in front of one of the little pieces of wood I cut because it wasn't even, and I couldn't have that. But that did give me just enough space to level the little shelf pieces out. I then used wood glue and hot glue to attach the pieces, and I did the same thing for the little painter stick that I had to put on the front of the one side of our shelf. To make sure the pieces were measured from the edge properly, I used a little painter stick, and I think I kept it like 2 inches in and just measured from the corner on each side. For the paint color, I'm still going with black, and I used the same matte that I've been using throughout the video. I was going to spray painted satin, but I'm like, no, everything else I'm hanging on the wall is the matte, so that's what I decided to roll with. Once that was completely dry, I used some tacky glue and some hot glue to attach our little Dollar General pieces right onto the front here, and then I took more of the tacky glue and hot glue to attach our little painter sticks right onto the sides of our baskets. For the handle sections, I took some of Dollar Tree's nautical rope and I pulled it apart just using one section to wrap around on each side. I applied this with tacky glue and hot glue, and I slowly just wrapped the nautical rope around right next to each other, and then I did one loop backwards in between those layers and attached in the back. Next, I took one of my little stencils I had and put on the handle itself, and I'm just using some white paint and stippling it on here. I wanted to add a little bit of something else other than just the stencil, so I took a dotting tool and added a few little accents in here, and I felt like it was still missing a little something, so I added some Dollar Tree metal ribbon. Dollar Tree sells these beautiful signs. They are extremely high-end looking on their own, if you ask me. I've done different crafts with these before, but today we're not going to use this side at all. We're going to use the back, and I've already painted it white. I'm trimming down this beautiful springtime clock, and as much of around it as I can, the design's intact, and just move on with using this design. This piece fits on here almost perfectly. We are going to have to make a couple adjustments. Just this way, it all looks fairly similar. I'm going to start from the top and then just work my way down little by little. We're going to do the same thing with this piece that we did with the other ones and add a stencil to cover over these gaps. I'm going to use this one, mind it. It's been used a couple times. It hasn't been cleaned, okay? Stop judging me, okay? If you don't have any dirty stencils in your stash, you're doing all right. Because I definitely got some dirty ones in mine. All right, little bit of our texture paste Don't need a lot. Well, for this one, we might need a little bit more than I used before. So it might be too much. It might be too much. I'm going to try and pop this on here. And don't be afraid. You know what I'm saying? Like to kind of put this and just pray. Don't be afraid to just put it here and pray. All right, because that's what I'm going to do. Listen, at the end of the day, all right, at the end of the day, doesn't have to be perfect, right? We're just making something we love, and that's it. That's all that really matters. Trying to match up all the gaps here, at least as much as I can. And my blue, I don't think matches anything, but whatever. We're here now. I'm not wasting my texture paste. That's all I got. And for covering up these spots, I really wanted to share with you all that you could just leave all the spots you want and then just texture right over it, giving your decoupage art a whole new level of pretty. All right, let's see what has happened. Let's see what's transpired under here. Oh, it's pretty. It turned out really good. Okay, we're gonna have to fill that gap over there, but for right this minute, super happy with that. All right, we're gonna do the same thing over here. Oh, that turned out so good. I'm so happy with this. We're gonna continue to just plop some spots down though. A couple of spots here. Whatever size would be perfect for this idea that we're about to create. I headed on over to the pre-cut section in Home Depot and grabbed one of these 1x6x4 pieces for just $6.65. Truth be told, my friends, I did not measure this. I just kind of put it in my miter saw and clamped it down and then cut what size I thought would be perfect for this wall planter. I am just going to keep this nice and rustic and use some antique Waverly wax. I'm going to apply this with a baby wipe and I'm going to apply it all over the entire piece of wood. Especially if you're going to be selling pieces like this, it's a good thing to make sure you're also doing the back. Somebody's going to peek behind there, so just make sure you get that side done as well. These are some cleaned out Campbell soup cans. We're going to give these a nice coat of paint and then we're going to attach them to our large piece of wood. Keep in mind whenever you're painting on different materials, you always want to check the paint that you're going to use and make sure it's going to adhere to that surface. I'm using DIY's clay base here. A good multi-surface or chalk paint also works good with this material. I ended up leaving some of the metal shining through, so these were a little rustic. I want to use Dollar Tree's metal lace to attach these. I started off by measuring out the lace, wrapping it around the can, so I made sure to give myself enough excess to attach it onto our piece of wood. Now you could do that 2 times, but I decided to just lay the piece I already cut down and measure another piece out and cut it. Now it's time for us to bring in the stapler. I want to make sure that our lace stays on our piece of wood, and this stapler is going to ensure that that happens. Really? Really? Got to be kidding me every single time. At some point, I'm going to learn my lesson and check that stapler before I start stapling. The problem is I always feel like I put a ton in there to start with, and I got, several videos before I got to worry about it. However, that never seems to work out. Now you're probably wondering, Brandy, how the hell are you going to staple underneath that can? Well, this is just the trick. I am going to leave just enough space for that can to shimmy itself inside of the metal lace. So I see how I'm like kind of, you gotta mess with it, okay? Because if you cut it too big, it's gonna slide right on through. that probably came out wrong. I mean, get your metal lace on there however you need to get it on there. This worked out for me. You know, I stapled one side, measured, stapled the other side, and then we are just shimmying our little can right on down. There were some smudges in the paint. No big deal. I just took the little sponge brush that I was using, went right over the little sections, and nobody's gonna know but me. You can leave your piece plain. I love using women in my art. I think they're absolutely beautiful and can just add something to anything you're DIYing. So we're gonna take this stencil that I have and use a little bit of Tim Holtz Distress Texture Paste, and we're going to put a thin layer over this. And then I'm gonna also take some sections of this and pop around in different areas on our board just to enhance the whole piece. Keep in mind, if you don't have any fancy schmancy tools to spread out your texture paste, it's no big deal. I have used a plastic spoon before. Use what you have on hand. Just make sure it's a nice flat piece. You could even use a popsicle stick. Also ensuring that your piece is taped down to whatever you're applying this on will stop from bleed through underneath your stencil. I personally recommend waiting at least 24 hours before sealing over this piece. And a great idea would be to seal it with some Rust-Oleum Clear Matte spray paint. This way you can just kind of spray it over your metal lace and the cans, kind of get a nice seal on everything, especially if you plan on reselling this piece. And then once it's all dry, pop in your florals. If you want to put some real florals in here, just take a drill gun and screw in some holes in the bottom of your cans. There are about 3 different Mod Podge hacks going on in this one project. I'm going to use this 14 by 14 t-shirt frame because this is the type of glass I wanted. I'm keeping this piece, but you use whatever you want to use and use any of these ideas. Now, one is going to be something that I'm pretty sure a lot of people have seen, where you can use Mod Podge to create a fake stain look on the glass. This piece of glass was really wiggly in here, and I decided to take some Gorilla Glue gel and glue the sucker to the frame so I didn't have to worry about it moving. And no, I'm not entrusting hot glue with that job, okay? It should go without saying that you need to clean your glass, all right? I'm just using some alcohol here on a towel and wiping this down, or a little paper towel, I should say, and wiping this down. Next, we're gonna bring in our stencil. Now you can use whatever kind of stencil you want. I've been holding on to this lion for quite some time. I knew I wanted to use that for this particular project, and I was waiting for my next Mod Podge hack video for it. Now I'm going to flip my frame over and tape this onto the bottom where I want the piece to come through on the opposite side of the glass. And some of you may have seen this, where people take puffy paint and they trace a stencil, or they paint a design using puffy paint, and then they'll mix some of Mod Podge with some acrylic paint, creating the fake stained glass look, which we're going to get to. But first, let's talk about this hack. You're going to need some squeeze bottles. This was technically the only one I had. I wanted to do several, but I didn't have enough time to wait for Amazon to deliver me more squeeze bottles. So we're going to use this one and get the point across. Take your Mod Podge and put it inside a squeeze bottle. Then grab you some acrylic paint, whatever color you want, and squeeze it in there until you're happy with the way that that color is blending in with your Mod Podge. And then grab you some mica powder and then put it inside of the bottle. Make sure it's in frame, because I'm not in frame here, and then shake it on up. You're gonna have a nice mixture, and your paint is gonna have an awesome looking color. And the fun thing about this, for whatever reason, I don't know why it works, is this will come out like puffy paint. See how it's going on here, just like this? It's going to stay just like that. It's going to not lose the 3D puffiness maybe just a little bit as it dries, but not a whole lot. And the best part is this also doesn't really bleed and go anywhere from other than where you're squeezing it. I'm taking the back of a paintbrush here just to kind of pull this DIY puffy paint around his little mane. So this is kind of two hacks in one. One, for whatever reason, the mica powder and the Mod Podge and the paint, it creates an awesome texture that gives a raised level to this as it dries. And then two, your paint, if you look at the mica powder and as this dries, you see it, it's going to have this beautiful shimmery look to it. It just looks amazing. I took the mixture in the bottle and I just basically used for the entire main part, and then to create the other colors, since I didn't have any more squeeze bottles, and if I did I would have did the same thing, I just used Mod Podge and acrylic paint. And you'll be able to see in the reveal that just the Mod Podge and the acrylic paint alone do not create as much of a puffy layer as adding that mica powder. Like I said, for whatever reason, the mica powder just allows it like a textured 3D appearance. I mean, there's a noticeable difference that it's a little bit raised, but it's not as raised. I hope that makes sense. Plus, the color is really cool when you add the mica powder. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking, Brandy, why not just use puffy paint? To be honest with you, I don't really like using puffy paint because it takes too long to dry and I'm impatient. This whole project that you're watching me make here, it took me 45 minutes. Not kidding, 45 minutes. Like, it dried pretty much as I went, even the thick sections. You could use a dotting tool for this part, but I wanted something a little bit thicker to make the ends kind of stand out, and just use the end of one of my crusty bit paintbrushes to trace on all the extra pieces that belong to our lion here. The best part about making pieces like this is as you're coming to an end, you can see it really start to come alive. And working with glass, you can really bend colors. So that's why it's so awesome creating fake stained art, because you can blend it in different ways, different shades, especially when you're hanging something on the wall or if you're putting it in the window, and it will give you different looks. So I just added a little bit of water to the colors that I already had on here. So this way it was extremely translucent and just shaded in different little sections. When it was all dry, I took some black paint and I took some white paint and added in a couple little highlights in different sections. You can really see the beautiful mica powder in that black paint mixture, as well as how puffy it is compared to just the Mod Podge and the acrylic paint. Love how this turned out. For this set of wonky roof houses, we're going to cut the tops completely uneven. I used a 31.6 angle on the miter saw in case you're interested, and I just cut them both different sizes. Obviously, cut your roofs however you want. Normally with common boards, you should sand them down. They can be a little bit rough, but these were pretty smooth, so I was really comfortable just grabbing some antique Waverly wax and giving these a nice thin coat. I used a little bit of water and a paper towel just to stain these on up, and then to speed up the process, I grabbed the heat gun to help me move on to our next part, which is one of my favorite parts, stenciling. I love to stencil. I grabbed these off Amazon. I will try and have these linked down in my affiliate link if you're interested in grabbing these cute little stencils. And we're going to use 2 different designs along with this Tim Holtz texture paste that is also down in my affiliate link. You can leave the texture paste the color it is or grab some paint like I am right here. We're going to mix this up and make it a little vanilla. I'm also going to take this decorative trim and create a little rooftop. You can pick these up from Home Depot in this little section right here, and you get 4 foot of this, which I think is a really good deal for $3.98. To make my life a little bit easier, I decided to just paint it before I started measuring and cutting it on up. I let that dry and I painted it the same vanilla color we are changing our texture paste to, and now it's time to bring in the miter shears. That's one thing I love about these little trim pieces that you can pick up from Home Depot is they're super easy to cut with the miter shears. Not everything is, okay? Shocker, but it's not. The best advice that I can give you whenever you are cutting trim is to leave a little extra, okay? Leave a little extra, leave room for error, people, leave room for error. It has been my experience that, you know, if you leave a little extra, it's always easy to get rid of some, but if you cut it too short, you can't create some, you know what I mean? You can't create some. Once I had these at the size that I was happy with, I then put them right at the tip of the roof and marked them so we could create a beveled cut, which is basically just a slant cut like this. You're going to place the little piece of trim where you have it marked in your miter shears. Hold it very steadily, people. Hold it very steadily. We don't want to lose no digits. I am not responsible for your muck-ups, okay? I'm just not. In order to get that bevel cut to match up with the other side, you have to switch the angle that you're cutting the miter shears and then do the same exact cut. It might not be a perfect, you know, match, which if you want to get fancy schmancy with it, grab some caulk, grab some spackling, smush it in where there's any gaps, or even chalk paint. If it's a tiny gap, that chalk paint will fill up some gaps, okay? I was not worrying about it for this project. I wanted it to look rustic anyway, so I just took some wood glue. I put it on half of our little piece of trim, and then I took some hot glue for the bottom piece of the trim. This way we got our immediate hold, so I could measure it in spot or in its space so it was even, and then I pressed it on down. Once I was done putting this little trim on our houses, I did notice there was some wood showing through with the trim, so I took some of that vanilla paint and just went right over it to cover that up. The Tim Holtz paste is super easy to work with. It's inexpensive, it's non-toxic. I really like this stuff, and it also blends well with colors. I mixed just a tiny amount up. A little bit goes a long way 90% of the time. Sometimes I wish I had a little bit more. And then I grabbed the painter's tape to tape our stencil down. You want to make sure that you do this whenever you're doing a raised stencil, or really any stencil, and cover any sections like I am here that you're worried about showing on your wood piece. So this way, just the design that you want shows up. But people, if I'm being real, sometimes, okay, the stencil's small and I can't fit painter's tape, so I will just like hold it down and pray. But it really does help with bleed through whether you're painting or doing a raised stencil. So if you can use painter's tape to hold your stencil in place, it's always a good idea. And people, look at that. It's so beautiful. I did the same exact thing, tape our little stencil down. And on this one, we're just going to use the little sleigh and the presents. I recommend waiting at least 24 hours before you pop a sealer on here. You could use some Mod Podge, poly, whatever makes you fuzzy inside. I'm probably just going to throw some Mod Podge on these. You can resell these. You can obviously keep them for your own home decor, give them as gifts, but they are absolutely stunning.